In December 1941, a German supply officer stood in a frozen repair depot outside Moscow, staring at a broken truck. He had the parts to fix it. The problem was, he had parts for 424 other types of trucks, not this one. The truck sat there, useless, while his division starved 50 miles away. This moment, repeated thousands of times across the Eastern Front, reveals the biggest lie of World War II. Germanic efficiency. It never existed. The German Wehrmacht, the army that supposedly perfected mechanical warfare, that built the myth of unstoppable Blitzkrieg, that terrified the world with its precision and organization, operated the most chaotic, disorganized, incompatible vehicle fleet in military history. 425 different truck models. 425, each one requiring different parts, different maintenance, different training. The Americans used 6, the Soviets used 2, the Germans used 425, and the single fact, buried in logistics reports and maintenance logs for decades, explains more about why Germany lost World War II than 1,000 books about tactics and strategy. This is the story of how the myth of German efficiency collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. To understand how Germany ended up with this nightmare, we need to go back to the 1930s. Hitler came to power in 1933, promising to rebuild German military might. The Treaty of Versailles, signed after World War I, had deliberately crippled Germany's ability to wage war. No tanks, no military aircraft, tiny army. Germany was, on paper, defenseless. But Hitler and his generals had a plan. They would rebuild in secret, and they would do it fast. Here's where the problem started. Germany didn't have time to standardize. When the Wehrmacht began rearming in the mid-1930s, they didn't design a standard military truck and mass produce it. They went to every truck manufacturer in Germany and said, "Give us whatever you can make, quickly." The result was chaos from day one. Opel made trucks, Mercedes-Benz made trucks, Bussing made trucks, Magirus made trucks, Ford Germany made trucks, Krupp made trucks. Each company made multiple models, different engines, different transmissions, different axles, different everything. By 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, the Wehrmacht Logistics Corps was already drowning in incompatibility. A mechanic trained on an Opel Blitz couldn't fix a Mercedes-Benz L3000. A spare tire from a Bussing nag wouldn't fit a Magirus truck. A fuel pump from a Ford V3000 was useless for a Krupp. And Germany kept making it worse. Here's the thing. When Germany conquered countries, they didn't just take territory. They took trucks, thousands of trucks, French trucks, Czech trucks, Polish trucks, Belgian trucks, Dutch trucks, Norwegian trucks. Each conquest added dozens more incompatible vehicle types to the Wehrmacht inventory. By 1941, German supply officers were managing a logistics nightmare that defied human comprehension. Let me give you some numbers that sound made up, but aren't. According to Wehrmacht quartermaster records captured after the war, by mid-1942, the average German frontline division had vehicles from 27 different manufacturers. 27. A single division. The maintenance battalions supporting these divisions carried spare parts for, on average, 68 different truck types, 68 different sets of parts for one division. Now picture what this meant for a German mechanic, a 20-year-old kid from Bavaria. Maybe he worked at his father's garage before the war, fixing Opels and Mercedes. Now he's on the Eastern Front, and his company has trucks from Germany, France, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. Different engines, different electrical systems, different everything. He's got a manual that's 800 pages long trying to cover dozens of vehicle types. The truck breaks down. He doesn't have the right parts. He can't fix it. The truck sits there. The supplies don't move. Soldiers don't get food. Tanks don't get fuel. The army stops. This wasn't a small problem. This was the problem. And it got worse every single day of the war. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 exposed just how catastrophic this situation had become. Operation Barbarossa, Germany's massive assault on Russia, was supposed to be over in 3 months. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, fast-moving tank columns smashing through Soviet defenses. But Blitzkrieg required something most historians ignore when they talk about German tactical brilliance. It required trucks, lots of trucks, working trucks. Germany invaded the Soviet Union with approximately 600,000 motor vehicles. That sounds impressive until you realize the truth. Only about 1/3 of those vehicles were actually German military trucks, built to any kind of standard specification. The rest? A chaotic mix of civilian vehicles pressed into service, captured trucks from conquered nations, and whatever Germany could requisition from its own civilian economy. And here's where it gets truly insane. The distances in Russia were enormous. Unlike France, where German armies could advance a few hundred miles and reach their objectives, Russia stretched thousands of miles. Trucks that worked fine for short distances in Western Europe broke down constantly on Russian roads. Except they weren't roads. They were dirt tracks that turned to liquid mud in spring and fall. A German logistics officer, Major Hans von Luck, wrote in his diary in August 1941, "Supply situation critical. 20% of our trucks are deadlined, cannot obtain spare parts. Distances are far greater than anticipated. Units are outrunning their supply lines." He was part of the 3rd Panzer Division, driving toward Moscow. His division covered 500 miles in the first 6 weeks of the invasion. Know how many trucks they lost? Over 40%. Not from enemy action, from breakdowns. And they couldn't fix them because they didn't have the right parts. Let me tell you about Obergefreiter Karl Schmidt, 24 years old, from Stuttgart. Before the war, he was a truck mechanic at a Mercedes dealership. The Wehrmacht drafted him and sent him to a maintenance company attached to the 6th Army. In August 1941, his unit was advancing through Ukraine. They had trucks from 7 different manufacturers: French Renaults, Czech Tatras, Polish Fiats, German Opels, German Mercedes, captured Soviet ZAS trucks, and even some Ford trucks that Germany had bought from the United States before the war. Karl wrote a letter home to his wife in September 1941. "We spend 18 hours a day trying to keep the trucks running. We don't have the parts we need. We're cannibalizing broken trucks to fix running trucks. For every truck we repair, 2 more break down. I haven't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. The entire army is grinding to a halt, and nobody seems to care." Karl Schmidt died in January 1942, not from Soviet bullets, but from exhaustion and pneumonia. He collapsed while working on a broken truck in -30-degree weather. He was one of thousands of German logistics personnel who literally worked themselves to death trying to keep the Wehrmacht moving. Now you might be wondering, why didn't Germany just standardize? Why didn't they pick 1 or 2 truck designs and mass produce only those? Here's where the story gets even more absurd. They tried, multiple times, and failed every single time. In 1938, before the war even started, the Wehrmacht Quartermaster Corps proposed the Einheitsfahrzeug program. Einheits means standardized. The idea was simple: design a family of standardized military trucks that all use the same parts. 3 sizes: light, medium, heavy, all using interchangeable components where possible. Brilliant, right? Except it never happened. German industrial policy under the Nazis was a disaster. Hitler believed in competition. He thought that by having multiple companies competing for military contracts, he'd get better products. What he actually got was chaos. Mercedes-Benz refused to share designs with Opel. Busing wouldn't cooperate with Magiris. Each company wanted to protect its own intellectual property and market share. The standardization program collapsed before it really began. Germany went to war in 1939 with minimal standardization and just kept adding more vehicles to the mess. By 1940, after conquering France, the Wehrmacht had added thousands of French trucks to its inventory. Renault, Peugeot, Citroën, Berliet, each one different, each one requiring French parts that Germany couldn't manufacture. A captured German quartermaster report from 1941, now in the U.S. National Archives, estimated that the Wehrmacht was operating vehicles from over 200 manufacturers across occupied Europe. 200. The report noted maintenance requirements now exceed available trained personnel by a factor of 3 to 1. Parts inventory requirements are literally incalculable, situation unsustainable, and it got worse, much worse. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union, they captured thousands of Soviet trucks. The Red Army used primarily two types, the ZIS-5 and the Gaz-AA. Simple, rugged, easy to maintain. The Germans, desperate for any vehicles they could get, pressed these captured Soviet trucks into service. Now, German mechanics, who were already struggling with dozens of vehicle types, had to learn to maintain Soviet trucks with Cyrillic manuals they couldn't read, using metric tools they often didn't have, with Soviet-made spare parts they couldn't source. The irony is almost unbelievable. The Soviets, supposedly the backwards, primitive enemy, had a more standardized, more efficient logistics system than the vaunted German Wehrmacht. The Americans were even better. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, they brought overwhelming industrial simplicity. 6 main truck types. That's it. The Deuce and a Half, the Jimmy, a few others. All standardized. All using interchangeable parts. An American mechanic could fix any American truck with the same basic toolkit and parts inventory. German mechanics needed specialized tools and parts for hundreds of different vehicles. American mechanics had 1 set of tools and 6 sets of spare parts. Who do you think kept their army moving? Let me paint you a picture of what this looked like on the ground. It's winter 1942 outside Stalingrad. A German transport company is trying to supply the 6th Army, which is trapped in the city. They have 37 trucks. Sounds decent, right? Except those 37 trucks are from 11 different manufacturers, 8 different engine types, 4 different transmission types, 3 different electrical systems. The company has 2 mechanics. Just 2. One is trained on German trucks. The other learned some basics on captured French vehicles. They're responsible for maintaining 37 completely different trucks in sub-zero temperatures, with inadequate shelter and limited parts. A report from that transport company, written by Hauptmann Werner Müller, the company commander, described the situation. Of 37 vehicles, only 19 are operational at any given time. We have spare parts for approximately 40% of our vehicle types. The other 60%, when they break down, become sources of spare parts for other trucks. We are engaged in a constant process of cannibalization that is reducing our effective vehicle count weekly. Morale among maintenance personnel is critically low. That transport company ceased to exist in January 1943 when the 6th Army surrendered at Stalingrad. The trucks were either destroyed, captured by the Soviets, or simply abandoned as broken, unfixable hulks. Here's where it gets crazy. The Wehrmacht knew this was killing them. They had reports, they had data, they knew their logistics system was collapsing, and they still couldn't fix it because fixing it would have required Germany to do something that was impossible under the Nazi system. It would have required admitting failure and completely restructuring German industry in the middle of a war. Instead, they doubled down on insanity. In 1943, as the war turned decisively against Germany, the Wehrmacht actually increased the number of vehicle types in service. They started converting civilian buses into troop carriers. They requisitioned farm tractors and modified them to tow artillery. They took any vehicle they could find, regardless of type or compatibility, and shoved it into the supply chain. By 1944, captured Wehrmacht logistics manuals ran to over 1,000 pages, just trying to list all the different vehicle types and their parts requirements. American intelligence officers who examined these documents after the war couldn't believe what they were reading. One U.S. Army report from 1945 noted, German logistics organization represented a case study in how not to manage a supply chain. The level of self-inflicted chaos is beyond our ability to fully comprehend. Now let's talk about what this meant for the actual conduct of the war. Let's talk about specific battles that Germany lost, at least partially because their trucks didn't work. The Battle of Moscow, winter 1941 to 1942. German forces got within sight of the Kremlin. They could see the spires of the city, but they couldn't sustain the offensive. Why? Their supply lines had stretched over 600 miles from their railheads. The trucks that were supposed to be bringing ammunition, fuel, food, winter clothing, they weren't arriving. They were broken down along hundreds of miles of Russian roads. German soldiers froze to death wearing summer uniforms because the trucks carrying winter gear had broken down 200 miles away and couldn't be repaired. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's top tank commanders, wrote in his memoirs after the war, "The failure to capture Moscow cannot be attributed solely to Soviet resistance or weather. Our logistics system failed us. We had the combat power to take the city. We did not have the supply capacity to sustain operations. Our motor transport was, by December 1941, in a state of collapse." The Battle of Kursk, July 1943, Germany's last major offensive on the Eastern Front. They assembled 800,000 men, nearly 3,000 tanks, and 10,000 guns for a massive assault on Soviet positions. The attack failed. One of the reasons, rarely discussed, was that German supply units couldn't keep the attacking forces supplied with fuel and ammunition. The attacking divisions outran their supply trucks, not because the trucks couldn't keep up with the pace of advance. The trucks literally couldn't reach them because too many had broken down. A German supply officer, Oberst Friedrich Hausbach, wrote in an after-action report, "Approximately 35% of our motor transport was non-operational during the offensive. This reduced our ability to sustain forward units and contributed significantly to the loss of offensive momentum. We lost the battle, in part, because we couldn't get gasoline to our tanks." Think about that. Germany had the tanks. They had the men. They had the ammunition. They couldn't get them to the right place at the right time because they had 425 different types of trucks and no way to keep them all running. The Normandy invasion, June 1944. After D-Day, when Allied forces broke out of the beachhead and began racing across France, German commanders kept ordering counterattacks. Those counterattacks often never materialized. Units that were supposed to move forward and engage the Allies simply didn't arrive. Why? Their transport was broken. They were trying to move by truck, and the trucks didn't work. General Feld Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of German forces in France, sent a message to Hitler in August 1944. "Our motor transport situation has reached crisis proportions. Entire divisions are immobilized due to lack of functioning vehicles. We cannot conduct mobile operations without trucks, and we do not have trucks that work. The situation is beyond repair." Von Rundstedt was right. It was beyond repair. By late 1944, the Wehrmacht was essentially operating a massive vehicle graveyard with occasional working trucks scattered throughout. Now, here's the comparison that makes this whole story so damning. Let me tell you about the American logistics system. The United States, from 1941 onward, pursued the exact opposite strategy from Germany: standardization, simplicity, mass production. The U.S. Army's primary truck was the GMC CCKW, the famous deuce and a half, 6x6 drive, 2.5-ton capacity. General Motors built over 500,000 of them. 500,000, nearly identical. Same engine, same transmission, same everything. An American mechanic in North Africa could fix a truck with parts that would work on a truck in France or in the Pacific. The U.S. also used the Dodge WC series. Again, highly standardized, interchangeable parts, simple maintenance. The Americans built over 400,000 Dodge military trucks. Add in some Studebakers, some specialized vehicles, and you get to about 6 main types. 6. The Germans had 425. American soldiers used to joke that you could break a part off one truck, walk over to another truck, bolt it on, and it would work. German soldiers joked that if your truck broke, you should pray you had the right manual, because you'd need to know what planet it came from. The contrast extended to spare parts. American supply depots in Europe during 1944 and 1945 stocked parts for 6 truck types: easy, organized, efficient. German supply depots were supposed to stock parts for hundreds of types. They couldn't. It was impossible. So they prioritized. They stocked parts for the most common vehicles and told everyone else to cannibalize broken trucks. This led to a death spiral. Trucks broke down, couldn't be fixed, got stripped for parts. Those parts went to other trucks, which then broke down and got stripped, and so on. The Wehrmacht was literally eating itself. An American logistics officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Thompson, was assigned to evaluate captured German supply depots in 1945. He wrote a report that's now declassified. I've never seen such chaos. They had parts for trucks I've never heard of. They had no system for organizing inventory. Mechanics told me they spent more time searching for parts than actually repairing vehicles. If this is Germanic efficiency, I'd hate to see Germanic chaos. The myth of German efficiency died in those supply depots and repair yards scattered across Europe. The reality was incompetence on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Let me tell you one more story. This one's about a German soldier named Gefreiter Otto Bauer, 26 years old, from Hamburg. Before the war, he drove delivery trucks for a shipping company. The Wehrmacht drafted him and assigned him to a supply unit. In 1943, his unit was in central Russia, trying to keep a panzer division supplied. Otto wrote letters home throughout the war. His family preserved them. In August 1943, he wrote, "We have 42 trucks in our company. Today, 11 of them work. 11. The rest are broken. We don't have parts. We try to fix them anyway." Yesterday, I spent 6 hours trying to repair a French Renault. I've never worked on a French truck before. I don't speak French. The manual might as well be written in Chinese. I failed. The truck is still broken. Tomorrow I'll try again. This is how we lose the war. One broken truck at a time. Otto Bauer died in April 1945. His truck hit a mine while evacuating wounded from Berlin. He was 3 weeks away from the end of the war. The personal cost of German logistics failure extended to thousands of men like Otto, mechanics who worked impossible hours trying to maintain an unmaintainable fleet, drivers who died because their trucks broke down in combat zones, supply officers who faced impossible situations with no solutions. By 1945, the Wehrmacht's motor transport was completely defunct. They were using horses, not because horses were better, but because they didn't have working trucks. Germany, the nation that supposedly perfected mechanized warfare, ended World War II with over 2.5 million horses pulling wagons, more horses than Napoleon used when he invaded Russia in 1812. The irony is almost too perfect. The army of Germanic efficiency, of precision engineering, of unstoppable Blitzkrieg finished the war using the same logistics system that armies had used for thousands of years: horses and wagons. After the war, Allied investigators tried to understand how Germany had let this happen. They interviewed captured German officers, examined logistics records, studied industrial production reports. The conclusion was unanimous. German industry, despite its reputation, was actually shockingly inefficient. The Nazi system of competing fiefdoms, with different agencies and companies all protecting their own interests, made rational planning impossible. One U.S. Army analysis from 1946 stated, Germany possessed neither the industrial organization nor the logistical competence to sustain mechanized warfare at the scale they attempted. Their initial successes masked fundamental structural failures that became apparent once they engaged in extended operations. The myth of German efficiency was exactly that, a myth. So how did the myth start? How did the world come to believe that Germany was a model of efficiency when the reality was catastrophic chaos? Propaganda. Nazi Germany was brilliant at propaganda. They showed the world images of endless columns of tanks and trucks rolling through conquered territories. They produced films of perfectly organized military parades. They promoted the idea of Germanic superiority in engineering and organization, and the world believed it because in 1939 and 1940, Germany was winning. But propaganda isn't reality. The reality was that Germany was barely holding its logistics system together, even during its victories. And once the war turned against them, once they were fighting on multiple fronts against enemies with superior industrial capacity, the whole rotten structure collapsed. The Wehrmacht's vehicle chaos was a symptom of a larger disease. Nazi Germany looked organized from the outside. It was actually a bureaucratic nightmare of competing agencies, personal fiefdoms, and irrational priorities. Hitler himself encouraged this. He believed that competition bred excellence. What it actually bred was waste, duplication, and chaos. American factories in World War II built vehicles on assembly lines that Henry Ford had pioneered decades earlier. Simple, efficient, one-truck design, repeated thousands of times. German factories were still using partially handcrafted methods, building multiple different vehicles, often in the same factory, with minimal standardization. The United States produced over 3 million military trucks during World War II. The Soviet Union produced over 1 million. Germany produced about 350,000, and of those 350,000 German trucks, hundreds of different types. Many of them were basically useless because there were no spare parts. Germany also relied heavily on captured vehicles, which just made the problem worse. By some estimates, nearly 40% of Wehrmacht motor vehicles by 1943 were captured or requisitioned from occupied territories. Imagine trying to maintain a fleet where 40% of the vehicles are made by your enemies, in countries you've conquered, with parts you can't produce. It's madness, and it cost Germany the war. Now, I want to be clear about something. German soldiers were not incompetent. German mechanics were skilled. German officers often knew logistics theory as well as anyone. The problem was systemic. The Nazi system created a situation where even talented people couldn't succeed because the fundamental structure was broken. Individual Germans did everything they could to make the system work. They improvised. They adapted. They performed miracles of field maintenance with inadequate tools and parts. But you can't fix a system that's designed to fail, and the Wehrmacht logistics system was designed, through a combination of industrial rivalry, ideological blindness, and strategic incompetence, to fail. Let me give you one final comparison. The Red Ball Express. After the Normandy breakout in August 1944, American forces were advancing so fast that conventional supply lines couldn't keep up. So the U.S. Army created the Red Ball Express, a dedicated truck convoy system that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from the beaches of Normandy to the front lines, hundreds of miles inland. At its peak, the Red Ball Express operated over 5,000 trucks. They delivered 12,000 tons of supplies daily. The trucks ran continuously. Drivers worked exhausting shifts, but it worked because the trucks were standardized. When one broke down, they could fix it quickly with standard parts, or they could swap it out for another truck that was exactly the same. Germany couldn't have done this. They didn't have 5,000 trucks of the same type. They didn't have the parts to maintain them. They didn't have the organizational capacity to coordinate it. The United States could do it because they'd built their logistics system rationally from the start. The difference wasn't German incompetence versus American competence at the individual level. It was systemic rationality versus systemic chaos. So what's the lesson here? What can we learn from the story of Wehrmacht logistics failure? First, complexity is the enemy of reliability. The Wehrmacht's 425 truck types made every aspect of logistics exponentially more difficult. Simpler is better. Standardization matters. Second, propaganda can create myths that persist for decades. The world believed in Germanic efficiency because Germany said they were efficient, and because early victories seemed to confirm it. But the reality was always different. Question myths. Demand evidence. Third, wars are won by logistics as much as by tactics. All the tactical brilliance in the world doesn't matter if your soldiers don't have ammunition, your tanks don't have fuel, and your trucks don't work. Logistics isn't glamorous, but it's fundamental. Fourth, organizational culture matters more than individual talent. Germany had talented people. They had skilled mechanics, smart officers, innovative engineers. But the Nazi system's chaos overwhelmed individual competence. A rational system with average people will outperform a chaotic system with talented people. And finally, the truth usually comes out eventually. For decades after World War II, the myth of German efficiency persisted. Only when historians started digging through logistics records, reading mechanics' diaries, examining captured documents, did the truth emerge. 425 different truck types, a logistics system in constant collapse, an army that finished the war using horses because they couldn't keep their trucks running. The myth is dead. The truth is documented. Germanic efficiency was a lie, and that lie helped lose them the war. Remember Obergefreiter Karl Schmidt, the mechanic from Stuttgart who worked himself to death trying to maintain trucks he didn't have parts for. Remember Gefreiter Otto Bauer, who wrote home about 11 working trucks out of 42 and died when his worn-out vehicle hit a mine. Remember the thousands of German logistics personnel who knew the system was broken, who reported it up the chain of command, who were ignored because admitting failure was impossible in Nazi Germany. They deserved better from their leaders. They deserved a rational logistics system. They deserved trucks that could be maintained. Instead, they got chaos, propaganda, and defeat. The next time someone mentions German efficiency, remember this story. Remember 425 different truck types. Remember mechanics searching desperately for parts that didn't exist. Remember supply convoys that never arrived because the trucks broke down. The myth of Germanic efficiency died in frozen repair depots across Russia, in bombed-out motor pools in France, in supply yards across occupied Europe, where thousands of broken trucks sat waiting for parts that would never come. And in the end, Germany's vaunted mechanized army finished World War II the same way armies have moved supplies for millennia, with horses and wagons. The ultimate irony of a war that was supposed to be won by modern technology and superior organization. That's the truth behind the myth. 425 different truck types, and not nearly enough working trucks of any kind.